For more than 4,000 years, a woman lay beneath the soil of Rakhigarhi, one of the largest cities of the Indus Civilization. Her name was gone, her language was unknown, no royal inscription identified her, and no written history explained who her people had been. When scientists finally recovered enough DNA from the tiny inner part of her ear bone, they expected her genome to settle one of the oldest arguments in South Asian history. Instead, it removed the two answers people had been fighting over. She did not carry the steppe ancestry later associated with many Indo-European-speaking populations. She also lacked the ancestry of the Anatolian farmers who carried agriculture into Europe, yet part of her genome was related to an ancient population from the Iranian plateau, while another part came from a deeply separated South Asian lineage, found nowhere in pure form today. One skeleton had exposed the first major truth about the origins of Indians. The people who built one of the world's earliest urban civilizations were already the result of a mixture whose beginnings reached thousands of years deeper than their cities. But that was only the first layer. For generations, the origins of Indians were compressed into opposing stories. One claimed that nearly everything important arrived from outside, farming from the west, language from the steppe, cities from migrants, and civilization through invasion. Another claimed that modern Indians descended almost unchanged from one ancient population that had always lived on the subcontinent. DNA has made both stories impossible to defend in their simplest form. Present-day Indians do not descend from one founding race, one migration, one language family, or one civilization. Their ancestry was assembled through repeated movements and mixtures involving some of the earliest modern humans in Asia, hunter-gatherers native to South Asia, groups connected to ancient Iran and Central Asia, steppe pastoralists, East and Southeast Asian populations, and many local communities that later became separated by strict endogamy. The surprise is not that Indians are mixed. Nearly every population is mixed. The surprise is the timing. For a long period, populations across the subcontinent exchanged ancestry on a massive scale. Then, roughly 2,000 years ago, many groups began marrying increasingly within their own communities. The genetic mixing that had created much of India slowed sharply. A population, formed through extraordinary movement, became divided into thousands of tightly separated groups. The same DNA that reveals ancient openness also records a later social closing. To understand how that happened, the story has to begin long before Rakhigarhi, before farming, before the Indus cities, and before anyone used the word India. Modern humans were present in South Asia tens of thousands of years ago. Most genetic evidence indicates that the major ancestry of present-day Indians ultimately derives from the successful expansion of modern humans out of Africa around 50,000 years ago, with only limited surviving contribution from earlier dispersals. The first populations entering the subcontinent encountered coastlines, forests, river systems, grasslands, mountains, and climates that changed repeatedly during the Ice Age. They were not one permanent tribe. Groups separated, expanded, disappeared, and met again across thousands of generations. The ancestry descended from these early South Asian hunter-gatherers is often called AASI, meaning Ancient Ancestral South Indian. The name can be confusing. It does not refer only to the modern south of India, and it does not describe one living tribe. It is a statistical reconstruction of ancestry related to ancient hunter-gatherers who lived in South Asia before later Western and Eastern migrations. No unadmixed AASI genome has yet been recovered from ancient remains. Tropical heat destroys DNA quickly, leaving researchers to infer much of this ancestry from present-day genomes and from ancient individuals who carried it in mixed form. The Onge people of the Andaman Islands were once used as a rough reference because they share a deep Eastern Eurasian relationship with AASI. But the Onge are not surviving copies of the first Indians. Their ancestors followed their own history of isolation and genetic drift. ASI and Andamanese-related ancestry share ancient roots, but they separated long ago. Treating an island community as a living fossil would repeat the same mistake DNA is correcting everywhere else. These early South Asian lineages survived. They did not vanish when new groups arrived. In many present-day Indian communities, especially some southern and tribal populations, AASI-related ancestry remains substantial. It is one of the deepest foundations of the subcontinent. But sometime before the height of the Indus Civilization, another ancestry entered the story. This second component was related to ancient populations from the Iranian plateau and surrounding regions. Earlier genetic models called it Iranian farmer ancestry, which encouraged a simple picture in which farmers from Iran entered India and brought agriculture with them. The Rakhigarhi genome complicated that conclusion. The Iranian-related ancestry in the Harappan individual separated from the ancestors of known early Iranian farmers, before those farmers formed a genetically distinct population. In other words, her Western-related ancestry was connected deeply to ancient Iran, but it did not appear to come directly from the same Anatolian-related farming populations that transformed Europe. That distinction matters, because farming may not have spread into South Asia through one giant replacement of local hunter-gatherers. Ideas, crops, animals, and people could move through different routes and at different speeds. Communities related to ancient Iranian plateau populations may have mixed with South Asian hunter-gatherers before or during the development of farming. Local people could also adopt new food production without being replaced. The genetic and archaeological evidence supports interaction, not one clean invasion. By around the 4th millennium BCE, populations carrying different proportions of AASI-related and Iranian-related ancestry were living across the greater Indus region and its neighboring zones. Archaeologists see growing settlements, craft specialization, long-distance exchange, and increasingly complex food systems. By approximately 2600 BCE, the mature Harappan phase had produced planned cities such as Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, Ganweriwala, and Rakhigarhi. Streets followed organized layouts. Drainage systems moved waste. Standardized weights supported trade. Craftspeople produced beads, pottery, metals, seals, and textiles. Merchants connected the Indus world with regions stretching toward Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Persian Gulf. Yet the civilization's people remained genetically mysterious because ancient DNA rarely survives in the region. Researchers attempted to study many skeletons at Rakhigarhi, but contamination and heat-damaged DNA defeated most samples. One individual, labeled I6113, eventually yielded enough usable genetic information. That single genome became the first published ancient DNA from an individual associated directly with the Indus Civilization. The result did not identify a pure Harappan race. It placed the woman on what researchers call the Indus periphery cline, a range of individuals carrying different mixtures of AASI-related and Iranian-related ancestry. Similar ancestry had been detected in people buried outside the core Indus zone at sites connected with Central Asia and the Iranian world. Those individuals may have been migrants from Indus-related populations or people with similar ancestry living along exchange networks. The Rakhigarhi woman lacked detectable steppe pastoralist ancestry. This was important because the modern North Indian and traditionally priestly groups carry higher proportions of steppe-related ancestry. If steppe ancestry had been central to the formation of the Indus civilization, scientists expected to find it in at least some Harappan-related genomes. The available evidence instead suggests that the steppe contribution entered South Asia mainly after the mature urban phase of the civilization. But one genome cannot represent millions of people across a civilization larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Rakhigarhi may not reflect every Harappan region, social group, or time period. Future DNA could reveal variation. The responsible conclusion is not that no Steppe-related person ever entered the Indus world. It is that the Harappan individuals studied, together with Indus-related individuals in surrounding regions, can be modeled without the later steppe ancestry that became important in parts of South Asia. Then, the cities began to change. After roughly 1900 BCE, many large Indus urban centers declined or were reorganized. Long-distance trade weakened, settlements shifted, and populations increasingly moved eastward and southward. Climate changes, including weakening monsoon systems and changing rivers, likely contributed, but there is no evidence for one sudden destruction of every city by a single invading army. The transformation unfolded across regions and generations. As Indus-related populations dispersed, they mixed further with groups carrying higher AASI-related ancestry. This process contributed to the formation of ancestry later called ASI, or Ancestral South Indian. ASI does not describe one ancient tribe and does not mean only Dravidian-speaking people. It is a mixed ancestry profile derived largely from Indus-related ancestry combined with additional AASI-related ancestry. Present-day groups carry it in different proportions. At approximately the same broad period, another population movement was approaching from the north. Pastoralist groups associated with the Eurasian steppe had already transformed parts of Europe and Central Asia. By the later Bronze Age, groups connected to the Sintashta and related steppe cultures moved through Central Asia. Their descendants carried ancestry often called steppe MLBA, meaning Middle to Late Bronze Age steppe ancestry. Ancient DNA from hundreds of individuals across Central and South Asia shows that this ancestry eventually entered the subcontinent. The genetic signal is strongest on the Y chromosome in many present-day groups, especially lineages related to haplogroup R1a Z93. This suggests that the movement was not balanced equally between men and women. Steppe-related men may have contributed disproportionately to later populations, although the social processes behind that pattern remain debated. Migration, marriage systems, status, warfare, and integration could all have played roles. This ancestry is also associated statistically with the spread of Indo-Iranian languages, including the ancestors of Indo-Aryan languages in South Asia. Genetics cannot recover spoken sentences from bones, so DNA alone cannot prove which language every migrant used. But the timing, steppe archaeological connections, and the distribution of Indo-European languages support a relationship between steppe movements and Indo-Aryan language expansion. This conclusion is politically sensitive because it has often been distorted into claims of racial conquest or modern ownership. The genetic evidence does not show a biologically pure Aryan race replacing a biologically pure native race. The steppe migrants themselves were mixed populations. When they reached South Asia, they mixed with descendants of Indus-related groups who were already mixtures of AASI-related and Iranian-related ancestry. Their descendants mixed again. The ancestry profile, later called ANI, or Ancestral North Indian, formed largely through combinations of Indus-related ancestry and steppe-related ancestry. ANI was not a population identical to Europeans, nor was it one invading army. It was an ancestral mixture that contributed in varying degrees to many groups across the subcontinent, including communities far from the north. The old ANI versus ASI model was useful, but too simple. It described two broad mixed ancestral poles found in many present-day Indians, not two original races. ANI contained more steppe-related ancestry. ASI contained more ASI-related ancestry. Both carried substantial ancestry connected to Indus-related populations. Almost no present-day mainland group represents either pole without later mixture. Then, for several centuries, these populations mixed widely. A 2013 study examined genetic patterns in numerous Indian groups and estimated that major mixture between ANI-related and ASI-related populations occurred between about 4,200 and 1,300 years ago, with different dates for different communities. During this period, ancestry crossed boundaries that later became much more rigid. Groups now separated by caste, region, or language exchanged genes. The genetic record contradicts any belief that present-day social categories have existed unchanged since remote prehistory. Around 2,000 years ago, the pattern shifted. Many populations began practicing stronger endogamy, meaning marriage within a defined community. Over time, thousands of groups developed their own founder effects. Some communities became genetically differentiated, even when they lived near one another and spoke related languages. In some cases, two Indian groups from neighboring areas can show more genetic separation than populations living in different European countries. This later isolation created major medical consequences. When a small founding population expands while continuing to marry internally, rare harmful variants can become unusually common. India contains many such founder events. Geneticists have found that numerous communities carry elevated risks for specific recessive disorders, but many groups remain understudied. Understanding ancestry is therefore not only about ancient identity. It can guide screening, diagnosis, and treatment for living families. The story becomes even more complex in eastern, northeastern, and central India. Austroasiatic-speaking populations, including many Munda-speaking groups, carry ancestry connected partly to Southeast Asian populations, mixed with ancestry already present in India. Genetic studies suggest that this Eastern-related contribution may have entered through migrations from Southeast Asia, possibly involving more men than women. But Munda populations are not Southeast Asian outsiders. Most of their ancestry comes from South Asian sources, and their communities developed in India through long local histories. Tibeto-Burman-speaking populations in the Himalayan and northeastern regions carry varying levels of East Asian and Tibetan plateau-related ancestry. These movements occurred through multiple routes and periods. High mountains did not form an absolute wall. People crossed passes, traded, fought, married, and adapted to altitude. The northeastern subcontinent became another meeting zone rather than a genetic edge. Coastal communities received additional ancestry through Indian Ocean trade. Merchants, sailors, soldiers, refugees, and religious communities arrived from Arabia, East Africa, Persia, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and later Europe. Parsis preserve ancestry connected to Iranian migrants mixed with local South Asians. Jewish communities in India combine different proportions of Middle Eastern and Indian ancestry. Siddhis carry substantial recent African ancestry alongside Indian contributions. These histories added new layers without replacing the deeper foundations. Even groups described as tribal are not untouched relics. Some preserve high proportions of particular ancient ancestries, but all have experienced drift, mixture, adaptation, and social change. The word tribal describes political and cultural identities, not populations frozen before civilization. In 2025, a major whole genome study expanded the picture using 2,162 deeply sequenced genomes from people across 18 Indian states representing different regions, language families, caste backgrounds, and tribal communities. The researchers confirmed that most Indians can be modeled primarily through ancestry related to three broad sources: ancient South Asian hunter-gatherers, Iranian-related populations, and steppe pastoralists with additional East and Southeast Asian-related ancestry important in many groups. But the study also found something older hiding inside modern genomes. Most people outside Africa carry approximately 1 to 2% Neanderthal ancestry inherited from encounters between modern humans and Neanderthals after the major out-of-Africa expansion. Some Asian and Oceanian populations also carry Denisovan-related ancestry. Because India contains enormous population diversity and many groups have remained partly separated, Indian genomes preserve a remarkable variety of archaic DNA fragments. By assembling overlapping segments carried by different individuals, researchers recovered a large portion of the Neanderthal and Denisovan genetic material that entered modern human ancestors. The Indian dataset contained exceptional variation in Neanderthal ancestry and many population-specific segments. No individual carries an entire Neanderthal genome, but thousands of people collectively preserve fragments lost from other sampled populations. That does not mean Indians are uniquely non-human or descended from a separate species. Archaic ancestry is part of the shared history of many non-African populations. India's importance comes from the diversity of surviving fragments and from the fact that the region was historically underrepresented in genomic research. When scientists sampled more people, the human story became larger. One major mystery still refuses to surrender: the language of the Indus Civilization. Thousands of short inscriptions survive on seals, pottery, and tablets, but no accepted decipherment exists. Some researchers connect the language to early Dravidian. Others propose different possibilities. Genetics cannot read those signs. The Rakhigarhi genome can show ancestry, but it cannot tell us what the woman called her city, which god she worshipped, or what words her family used at home. This gap matters because language can spread without massive population replacement. A smaller group with political power, military organization, or social prestige can influence language far beyond its genetic contribution. The opposite can also happen. Migrants may adopt the language of a larger local population while leaving detectable ancestry behind. Steppe-related DNA therefore supports migration into South Asia, but it cannot prove that every person carrying it spoke an Indo-Aryan language or that every Indo-Aryan speaker received the same amount. The same caution applies to Dravidian languages. Their deep history remains debated. They may have been connected to populations of the Indus world, but the evidence is not decisive. Present-day Dravidian speakers are genetically diverse and carry all three major ancestry layers in different proportions. A language family is a cultural history, not a blood type. Ancient DNA also cannot settle modern questions of status or belonging. A person does not become more Indian by carrying more AASI-related ancestry, more Harappan-related ancestry, or less steppe ancestry. Every one of those components existed before modern borders and identities. Most are shared across communities that later became rivals. Science becomes strongest when it removes false certainties rather than replacing them with new myths. One skeleton cannot identify the first Indian. One Y chromosome lineage cannot define an entire migration. One modern caste cannot claim exclusive descent from an ancient civilization. Each genome is one witness, and South Asia still has far fewer ancient witnesses than Europe or Central Asia. Future discoveries could change important details. DNA from additional Harappan cemeteries may reveal regional diversity. Earlier farming communities could show when Iranian-related ancestry entered. Ancient remains from southern and eastern India could provide the first direct view of AASI-rich populations. The story is established in broad layers, but many human lives between those layers remain missing. Until those genomes are recovered, every confident map contains empty spaces. The danger begins when people color those spaces with politics, pride, or fear, and then present the result as something ancient DNA has already proven. This creates the final reversal. The DNA of India does not point backward toward one first Indian. It points toward a sequence of populations that repeatedly became something new. Early hunter-gatherer ancestry survived inside farming and urban populations. Iranian-related ancestry entered without a simple European-style farming replacement. Indus-related people built cities before steppe ancestry became widespread. Steppe pastoralists later mixed with descendants of those cities. East and Southeast Asian-related populations added major ancestry in the Northeast, and among Austroasiatic speakers, Indian Ocean networks added still more. Then social boundaries hardened, preserving different combinations in thousands of communities. Language does not map perfectly onto genes. A Dravidian speaker can carry substantial steppe-related ancestry. An Indo-Aryan speaker can carry high AASI-related ancestry. Caste status does not represent a pure biological origin. Region, marriage, migration, and history repeatedly cross the categories people now treat as ancient. The Rakhigarhi woman could not have called herself AASI, ANI, ASI. Harappan by the modern archaeological meaning, or Indian, in the modern national sense. Those labels were created thousands of years after she died. Her genome is valuable precisely because it existed before later identities were projected backward. She carried one of the mixtures that helped create future South Asians, but she was not the final ancestor of all of them. Steppe-related ancestry entered after her time. Additional AASI-related mixture reshaped southern populations. Eastern ancestry entered other regions. Her civilization declined, but its people did not simply vanish. They moved into later populations. This may be the most important discovery ancient DNA has made about India. Civilizations can disappear from archaeology while their people continue inside later communities. Migrations can change language without erasing everyone already present. Social systems can claim ancient separation even when genomes reveal earlier intimacy. A population can be both deeply local and connected to distant movements. The origin of Indians was never one event because India was never one biological population. It was a meeting ground. The first South Asian hunter-gatherers did not disappear. The Indus people did not disappear. Steppe migrants did not remain separate. Iranian-related ancestry did not arrive in one simple invasion. East Asian-related groups did not stop at the mountains. Each layer entered a landscape already full of people, and every arrival was changed by those it met. For thousands of years, the mixture created the population. Then endogamy preserved the layers. That is why two neighboring communities can share the same ancient foundations, but carry very different frequencies of disease variants. It is why ancestry changes gradually across geography, while social identity can change at a village boundary. It is why no DNA result can declare one group the original Indians and everyone else foreign. The genome does not support that kind of ownership. It reveals inheritance without granting possession. 4,000 years after the woman at Rakhigarhi was buried, scientists read the surviving fragments of her DNA and found no simple answer. That was the answer. Her people were already connected to ancient South Asian and Iranian-related lineages. Later, Indians would add steppe, eastern, and other ancestries. The civilization around her would fall silent, but parts of its population would survive across the subcontinent. She did not prove that Indians came from one place. She proved that the search for one place had been wrong from the beginning.